Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today is the day when I can finally give you my results of all my AMD B650 motherboard testing. And boy oh boy, was this one a massive undertaking. In total, I have tested 35 motherboards in what has been months and months of work, but it's finally all done. And before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so since there are 35 boards in total, I'm not going to show you every single board individually as I normally would, at least not in as much detail, as that alone would take about an hour. So instead, we'll briefly do a specs comparison, we'll talk about some of the standard options, and then we'll dive into the VRM thermal results. And I'll go through the boards in order of price, starting with the cheapest and then working our way up. I also did a lot of benchmarking for this video, stuff like boot times, performance, all that kind of stuff, but I've decided not to include those results because some of them are now outdated with the new wave of BIOS updates. And honestly, I just didn't have it in me to go back and retest most of the boards, almost all 35 of them. But the VRM thermal data is still accurate with the latest BIOSes. So I'm happy to show that data, not keen on showing what's possibly outdated data. And this content's really been delayed long enough. So yeah, as I said, don't really have it in myself to go back and test all of the boards again for stuff like boot times, which may or may not be relevant to you. So we're just going to stick with the VRM thermal data, the specs comparisons, and then the boards that I recommend you purchase. But if you're wondering why there isn't more benchmark data like what I've included in a few of the previous videos, that's the reason. Also on that note, some of the more affordable models here from each brand have already been covered in a dedicated video, which featured a lot more benchmarking. So given all of that, I'll only briefly touch on those boards. And the most affordable of which is the Gigabyte B650M K. And although this board only costs $120 US, it's not a particularly great board in my opinion, as it uses discrete MOSFETs rather than power stages, and as a result, the VRM thermals using a high-end processor, they're not great. It also only has 2 PCIe slots and no PCIe 5.0 support, not even for the primary M.2. It's also very light on USB ports, so despite the low price tag, this is a board I'd avoid and instead set your sights on the Asrock B650M HDV M.2. The Asrock board costs just $5 more right now, but it packs a significantly better VRM using 8 50-amp power stages for the V-Core, along with 3 PCIe expansion slots and a PCIe 5.0 M.2. You also get 3 more USB ports. It does only have a dual DIMM configuration, so just 2 memory slots, but for most of you, I think that's going to be fine as you'll likely purchase 32GB of DDR5 memory now, and that really should be ample for quite a few years to come when it comes to gaming. There's also the Gigabyte B650M DS3H, and that's a board that should be on your radar. It does have a solid VRM and decent expansion options, though it does lack PCIe 5.0 support, but at $150 it's well stocked and does include 4 DIMM slots for memory expansion. Moving on, we find the MSI Pro B650M-A Wifi, and this is the most affordable B650 motherboard to include Wi-Fi support, along with 11 USB 3.2 ports. You also get 3 PCIe slots and 2 M.2 slots, though none of them are PCIe 5.0 compatible. The 855-amp power stage V-Core VRM does work well, so at $160 US, this is a pretty solid option. Then we have the ASUS Prime series, which includes the Prime B650M-A Wifi, Prime B650-Plus, and Prime B650M-A Wifi 2, all of which, I am sad to say, suck and should be avoided. Like the ultra-cheap Gigabyte B650M K, the ASUS Prime boards all use discrete MOSFETs, which result in poor VRM thermals. The B650-Plus and B650M-A Wi-Fi both run at over 100 degrees in our testing, while the B650M-A Wi-Fi, it's a bit less garbage, but at $190 it is a weak offering. A much better option at this price point is either the Asrock B650 PG Lightning or the PG Riptide Wi-Fi, both of which cost $190. The Lightning is an ATX board and it packs 14 60-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, 4 PCIe expansion slots, a PCIe 5.0 M.2, and an additional 2 PCIe 4.0 M.2s. There's also a boatload of USBs on offer here, with support for up to 11 USB 3.2 ports and 8 USB 2.0 ports. The Riptide, on the other hand, it is a micro ATX board. It uses a dozen 50-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, and it still manages to squeeze in 4 PCIe slots, though unless you have a single slot graphics card, you're not going to be able to use all of them. There's also just 2 M.2 slots, but the primary slot is PCIe 5.0 compatible. You also get 9 USB 3.2 ports and 8 USB 2.0 ports, along with 2.5 gigabit LAN and Wi-Fi 6E. Though I should note that all of the boards, every single one of the B650/B650E boards does include 2.5 gigabit LAN. So that's a standard feature across all of the boards. Now, another viable option at this price point is the Gigabyte B650M Aorus Elite AX, which includes a dozen 60-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, though just 2 PCI expansion slots. It does include a PCIe 5.0 enabled M.2, along with an additional PCIe 4.0 M.2, 11 USB 3.2 ports, 8 USB 2.0 ports, and then Wi-Fi 6E. Then also found at the $190 US price point is the MSI Pro B650-P Wifi with a dozen 75-amp power stages, and this is another great option. That said, it does lack PCIe 5.0 support, but you are getting 4 PCIe 4.0 expansion slots and a pair of M.2s. It's also the most affordable B650 motherboard to offer 6 SATA ports. Then, priced between $200 and $210, we have the Gigabyte B650M Gaming X AX, B650M Aorus Pro AX, and MSI Mag B650M Mortar Wi-Fi, all of which are pretty solid options. The Gigabyte B650M Aorus Pro AX would be my pick of this bunch. Its 12 70-amp power stages are more than sufficient, and it's the only one of the 3 to offer PCIe 5.0 M.2 support, and you also get 11 USB 3.2 ports and 8 USB 2.0 ports. And for $10 less, the B650M Gaming X AX, it just isn't worth it, as it lacks PCIe 5.0 support and it packs a significantly weaker VRM. Meanwhile, the MSI Mag B650M Mortar Wi-Fi, it's decent, but again, it lacks PCIe 5.0 M.2 support and there's less USB ports overall. Then we have the Asrock B650 Pro RS at $215, which finds itself in a competitive pricing bracket. It's an ATX board, but for just $5 more, the Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX, B650 Gaming X AX, and MSI Mag B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi all become available. That said, the B650 Gaming X AX doesn't really make sense because for the same price, the Aorus Elite AX is just a much better product, packing 14 70-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, PCIe 5.0 M.2 support, and 11 USB 3.2 ports. So in my opinion, the MSI Mag B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi and Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX are both better than the Asrock B650 Pro RS, with many more USB 3.2 ports and Wi-Fi 6E support, and personally, I'm again leaning more towards the Gigabyte board for its PCIe 5.0 M.2 support, but really I'd be happy with either option here as they are both very good. There's also the ASUS Tough Gaming B650M-Plus Wi-Fi. It's a micro ATX board with a dozen 60-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM. It's a decent board on paper, but doesn't really offer anything over the B650M Aorus Pro AX, and there are a lot less USB 3.2 ports on offer here. Moving on to the $230 US price bracket, we find the Asrock B650 LiveMixer, which is a bit of an oddity to say the least, but it is a very unique board and therefore I suppose it's kind of cool. Basically, you'd buy this board over anything else here simply because you like the look of it. In terms of features, it's nothing special at this price point, and there are certainly better options in my opinion, but they're not significantly better. And while the LiveMixer does lack Wi-Fi 6 support, you do get an insane 21 USB ports, or at least support for up to 21 ports, though just 9 of them are of the 3.2 standard. But if the in-your-face design of the LiveMixer just isn't for you, the Asrock B650E PG Riptide Wi-Fi for just $10 more is a better option anyway. You get the same 14 60-amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, but the Riptide also includes PCIe 5.0 support for the primary PCIe slot as well as the primary M.2, and it's the most affordable B650 board to offer this configuration. You also get Wi-Fi 6E support, though the number of USB 3.2 ports is reduced to just 7. So I think it's fair to say at $240, Asrock's B650E PG Riptide Wi-Fi makes life difficult for the ASUS Tough Gaming B650-Plus Wi-Fi and MSI PG B650 Edge Wi-Fi, both of which cost $240. The Tough Gaming in particular just really struggles here. The VRM's been downgraded with 2 fewer 60-amp power stages, and there's no PCIe 5.0 support beyond the primary M.2 slot, so there's really no advantage to buying the ASUS board. The MSI PG B650 Edge Wi-Fi does receive an upgraded VRM with 80-amp power stages, and there are 4 more USB 3.2 ports, but again, you are giving up PCIe 5.0 support for the primary PCIe slot. The Edge Wi-Fi though does somewhat cancel out Gigabyte's B650 Aorus Pro AX, though for $10 more, you do get a massively upgraded V-Core VRM with 16 90-amp power stages, which frankly is overkill, but also, I guess, why not? So you really could go with either of these boards. But again, neither really match the value of Asrock's B650E PG Riptide Wi-Fi. Now, currently priced at $255 is the ASUS ProArt B650 Creator. It's another odd entry that doesn't really compete that well on paper. It's a cool looking motherboard, very elegant, I guess you could say, at least compared to the norm, but it's also very normy when it comes to features. The VRM is more typical of a $200 board with a dozen 60-amp power stages, so not amazing for core-heavy work with, say, a 7950X, though it'll certainly work. There's no PCIe 5.0 support for the PCI expansion slots, though you do get a single PCIe 5.0 enabled M.2 with an additional 2 PCIe 4.0 M.2s. There's just 8 USB 3.2 ports, and really, the only unique feature on offer here is a second wired Ethernet connection, but it's just a gigabit connection, and they cost basically nothing to include via an add-on card. So that's not exactly an exciting feature, and the board misses out on Wi-Fi 6, which I do find a bit odd. You do get USB-C DisplayPort, so maybe that's useful, not exactly sure on that one. I'd actually say that the Gigabyte B650 Aero G is a much better creator-type motherboard, and the VRM here is massively upgraded with 16 90-amp power stages for the V-Core. You also get Wi-Fi 6E and more USB 3.2 ports, so it just seems like a better board all round. That said, at this price point, I'd be eyeing off the Asrock B650E Steel Legend Wi-Fi. You get the same VRM configuration as the Aero G, but the board offers PCIe 5.0 support for the primary PCIe slot, but beyond that, the feature lists are very similar. The only odd aspect I'd say of the Steel Legend is the fact that it supports just 2 SATA devices and has a grand total of just 2 PCIe slots. Then at $280, we find the ASUS ROG Strix B650-A Gaming Wi-Fi, and this is another ASUS board that looks a bit lost at this price point. It really does need to be priced below $260 to make sense in my opinion. Again, you're only getting a dozen 60-amp power stages, so a V-Core VRM configuration that competes better at the $200 price point. There's no PCIe 5.0 support for the primary PCIe slot, there's just 7 USB 3.2 ports in total, and everything else is pretty standard. And making the ROG Strix B650-A Gaming Wi-Fi seem even more bizarre is the fact that for the same $280 right now, you can buy the ROG Strix B650E-F Gaming Wi-Fi, which switches to the more powerful 80-amp power stages. It includes PCIe 5.0 support for the primary PCIe slot, and it packs 10 USB 3.2 ports, along with 2 more USB 2.0 ports. When compared to the Steel Legend, you also get twice as many PCIe slots with the addition of 2x1 slots, which can be useful for adding in more SATA ports, for example, via an add-in card. It also competes well with MSI's flagship B650 board, the MPG B650 Carbon Wi-Fi, which currently costs $290, and I think it's a little bit underwhelming at that price point. When compared to the B650-A Gaming, the Carbon drops PCIe 5.0 support for the primary PCIe slot, but you get an additional PCIe 4.0 M.2 and 2 more 80 amp power stages. So overall, the boards are pretty similar, but I like the ASUS board for the superior PCIe 5.0 support. But if you want to spend even more money on an ASUS B650 motherboard, then we have the ROG Strix B650E-E Gaming Wi-Fi. Pretty confusing names, all of these ASUS boards, but whatever. This one does cost an eye-watering $350, and the key advantage it has over the F Gaming is the inclusion of a second PCIe 5.0x16 slot and a fourth M.2. It's hard to say if that's worth the $70 premium. I kind of think not, but for those of you who wish to go all out, it is a very nice motherboard. Alternatively, for $20 more, you could buy the Asrock B650E Taichi with its insane 24 105 amp power stage V-Core VRM. You could say extreme overkill, I suppose. There's no chance this board even needs VRM heatsinks. But other than the insane VRM, there's really nothing amazing here. And really, for $100 less, the Steel Legend is basically the same product. Then we have the Gigabyte B650E Aorus Master, which I had to price check several times while I was making this content, as I couldn't quite believe that it costs $430 US, which it does cost at the time of making this video. I believe upon release, this board was more like $350, which seems like a lot more reasonable for what it is. $430 though, not so much. That said, as I was about to dunk on the B650E Aorus Master and its high asking price, I did start to compare it with other high-end X670E boards, and it started to become a bit more reasonable, at least for those of you considering spending about $400 on an AM5 motherboard. Firstly, you do get a 16 105 amp power stage V-Core VRM, which again is extreme overkill, but if for some reason you're into overclocking or whatever, this could be a good board for you. It does, of course, include a PCIe 5.0x16 slot, but rather than go for a second like ASUS did with the E-Gaming, they've instead included not one, but rather 4 PCIe 5.0 enabled M.2 slots. Personally, I would have preferred to see a second PCIe x16 5.0 slot, as that adds a lot more flexibility to the board, but still, 4 PCIe 5.0 M.2 is kind of cool. Now, if you wanted to get a similar VRM configuration from an X670E motherboard, you'd have to pay $490 for the X670E Aorus Master, though the MSI X670E Carbon Wi-Fi for $440 is also a great option. So at $350, the B650E Aorus Master might make sense, but for $400, you are better served by a similarly priced X670E board in my opinion. Finally, for those of you after an ITX motherboard, I have tested the MSI MPG B650i Edge Wi-Fi and ASUS ROG Strix B650E-I Gaming Wi-Fi. The MSI model costs $270 and the ASUS model $330, so both are quite pricey. Since acquiring all of my B650 motherboards, or 35 of them, the Gigabyte B650i Aorus Ultra for $260 that has become available, and the Asrock B650E PG-ITX Wi-Fi for $290. Now, the MSI MPG B650i Edge Wi-Fi packs 8 80 amp power stages for the V-Core VRM, but no PCIe 5.0 support. There is a single PCIe 4.0x16 slot and 2 PCIe 4.0 M.2 slots. Then you get 9 USB 3.2 ports, 2 USB 2.0 ports, and 4 SATA ports. For $60 US more, the ASUS ROG Strix B650E-I Gaming Wi-Fi, that does offer PCIe 5.0 support for the primary, or the only, PCIe x16 slot, as well as PCIe 5.0 to the M.2, the primary M.2 that is, along with a secondary PCIe 4.0 M.2. You also get 8 USB 3.2 ports and 4 USB 2.0 ports, along with 2 SATA connectors. So it's certainly a better equipped board, but whether or not it's worth the premium, hard to say, and of course that will be up to you to decide. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at each motherboard individually, it's time to get testing. And for testing all B650 boards, we're using the Gigabyte Aorus C500 glass case with the Aorus Waterforce X 360mm AIO. Now for recording temperatures, I'm using a digital thermometer with K-type thermocouples, and I'm reporting the peak rear PCB temperature. Finally, I'm not reporting delta T over ambient, instead I maintain a room temperature of 21 degrees, and to ensure a consistent ambient temperature, a thermocouple is positioned next to the test system. As for the stress test, I'm using the Ryzen 9 7950X, and for load Cinebench R23, which was looped for an hour, at which point I'm reporting the maximum PCB temperature, again recorded using K-type thermocouples. So let's go take a look at the results. So here are the VRM temperature results, and I don't think it'll surprise anyone to learn that the Aorus Master and Taichi are the two best performing boards, though there are a number of Aorus Pro and Elite models with similar temperatures in the low 50s. Now I should stress that once VRM temperatures dip below say 70 degrees, it really doesn't matter which board runs cooler. For core heavy productivity workloads in a warm environment, all boards will perform very well. Even sub 80 degree VRM temperatures are very acceptable, and really it's only the boards running over 90 degrees that I'd recommend you avoid, especially if you're in a warmer climate. And this data really just confirms that the vast majority of B650 boards run at acceptable temperatures, with just 3 boards in particular that you should avoid if you're going to be running a 170 watt CPU like the 7950X. Even then though, regardless of the CPU you plan on using now, those boards should be avoided, as you can purchase similarly equipped boards for the same price or even less in some instances that run at much lower VRM temperatures. So in a nutshell, any of the boards shown here running at sub 80 degree temperatures should be purchased based on the price and features, not how cool they ultimately run. And as an example, you wouldn't buy the MSI Tomahawk over the Asrock PG Lightning because it runs 5 degrees cooler in our testing. In fact, it might be wise to save the $30 and get the Asrock board, especially if you don't need Wi-Fi, as the PCIe 5.0 M.2 support could be more useful to you. But if you're looking at two boards that occupy a similar price point and offer the same features, but one runs say 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the other, then VRM thermals might see you favor the cooler running board in that example. It's just another piece of the puzzle, and depending on your needs, well, you'll have to piece it all together. There's just so many B650 motherboards. I tested 35 of them, which I think is pretty insane. It took a ridiculous amount of time, and even then I haven't been able to look at all of them. There are a couple that either weren't released in time for this content or they were just unavailable when I was rounding up all of these boards, which just getting my hands on this many boards was a huge undertaking in itself. Anyway, we've now looked at 35 of the boards, and I think the good news is that most of the boards, pretty much all of them really, bar a couple, are very good. And you can spend as little as $125 and still get a really good board that'll work under all conditions. There are a few standout options though, and the $125 Asrock B650M-HDV/M.2 is one of them. If you are looking at jumping on the AM5 platform but wish to spend as little as possible while still ensuring that you have a solid upgrade path in the future, then the HDV is the board for you. The Gigabyte B650M DS3H is also a very good board, but the HDV is better in my opinion, and a little bit cheaper. The only potential advantage of the DS3H is its extra DIMM slots for memory expansion, but if you don't need that, then the Asrock board is better in my opinion. And if you were going to step up to the DS3H, then the MSI Pro B650M-A Wifi, it's a better buy right now. For just $10 more, you get an extra PCI expansion slot, more USB 3.2 ports, and Wi-Fi 6E. As for the best micro ATX B650 motherboard, my pick here is the Gigabyte B650M Aorus Pro AX. You get PCIe 5.0 M.2 support, an amazing VRM, and plenty of USB 3.2 ports, all for $210 US. Basically, it outclasses the ASUS Tough Gaming B650M-Plus Wi-Fi, MSI Mag B650M Water Wi-Fi, and Gigabyte's own B650M Aorus Elite AX and B650M Gaming X AX. Now, if you're after a more affordable ATX B650 board, there are a few options priced between $190 and $220 US. None of them, though, offer PCIe 5.0x16 support, though some of them do offer PCIe 5.0 M.2 support, and those models include the Asrock B650 PG Lightning, Asrock B650 Pro RS, and Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX. Now, of those boards, the PG Lightning is the cheapest, and yet it offers the most PCIe slots, 3 M.2s in total, and loads of USB ports. Really, all it lacks relative to the competition is Wi-Fi, but if you don't care about Wi-Fi, then it is my recommendation as the best value B650 ATX motherboard. And if you are after Wi-Fi 6E support out of the box, either the MSI Pro B650-P Wifi or Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX will work nicely. Now, of the B650E boards, the best value option here is also the cheapest, the Asrock B650E PG Riptide Wi-Fi, though it is a little light on USB 3.2 ports with a possible 7. So if you require more, a $30 premium will be required to acquire Asrock's B650E Steel Legend Wi-Fi, though be aware this board only features 2 SATA ports and 2 PCIe slots. Therefore, I feel the ASUS ROG Strix B650E-F gaming Wi-Fi is the best all-rounder B650E motherboard at $280. You get 4 PCI expansion slots, 3 M.2 slots, 10 USB 3.2 ports, and a further 8 USB 2.0 ports, and there's also 4 SATA ports. Then beyond that, it's really either the ASUS ROG Strix B650E-E gaming Wi-Fi, Asrock B650E Taichi, and then of course the Gigabyte B650E Aorus Master. The Aorus Master just makes very little sense right now at its current price. The Taichi is a decent board, but it's not amazing at anything really, though it does offer USB 4 support out of the box, so that might be useful to you. Anyway, in my opinion, I think the ASUS eGaming is the best high-end option here. The fact that it offers 2 PCIe 5.0 enabled x16 slots is very cool. Mind you, I'm not saying that you particularly need that feature, but if you want it, this is the cheapest means of acquiring that particular configuration. For example, the MSI MPG X670E Carbon Wi-Fi is the most affordable X670E motherboard to offer 2 PCIe 5.0 enabled x16 slots, and it costs $440 US right now. So you're looking at an almost $100 discount with the ASUS eGaming. The eGaming is also the most affordable of the 3 boards, and although it has the weakest VRM, it is still massively overkill, peaking at just 60 degrees with the 7950X in our testing. So the ASUS ROG Strix B650E-eGaming Wi-Fi is the best high-end board, and it's what I would get if I was looking at spending comfortably over $300 US on a B650 motherboard. And with that said, let me know which of these B650 boards you're planning on buying, or which one maybe you've already bought. So hopefully it was one of the good ones, not one of the ASUS Prime boards. Anyway, let me know in the comment section below. And hopefully this B650 buying guide was useful to you. And if it was, please do give it a like. It does help out a lot. I think it does. I don't know. Maybe it does. Anyway, helps out my mental state, and maybe it'll encourage me to do something like this again with future motherboard generations. Not sure on that one. I also have to try and convince Balin to do a lot of B-roll and editing. So it was a lot of work for both of us. Anyway, enough waffling. Think we're done with this one. If you did enjoy it, you know what to do. Subscribe for more content. And we have Floatplane and Patreon. I honestly did a lot of this content for our Floatplane and Patreon members who have been begging for it. Apologies for the delay, but yeah, it was a bigger undertaking that even I could have imagined. And we've done some big content here at Hardware Unboxed. So, yep, Patreon, Floatplane, you get access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, behind-the-scenes content, and Q&As. I'm your host, Steve. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.